Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Rahim Rahimtullah. I'm joined today in the newsroom by Mr. Horst Zimmermann. He's a German professor of public finance, but he works now at GIZ. That's the German Ministry. It's the project arm for the German Ministry of International Development Aid. And he's in Ukraine now as a consultant on the fiscal aspects of decentralization. Mr. Zimmermann, many thanks for joining us today in the newsroom.
My pleasure.
I was wondering if I could start by asking you for your impressions so far on how Ukraine is doing with its the fiscal aspects of decentralization.
Well, Ukraine comes from a very centralist part, as you know, and it's only 20 years, or somewhat more than 20 years. And of course, you cannot decentralize everything at one moment. All the administration is thinking in terms of central Kiev and going down, but just over the last 2-3 years, tremendous efforts have been made. They were so fast that when I came here in April again after 2-3 years, I thought it cannot work this way.
And you weren't so sure that it could work when you first came to Ukraine and they first started on these efforts?
In April again, yes, right. Because so many steps were taken all at a time that from German experience, where it took us 20 years in the 70s to really reorganize the pattern of communities, for instance, and they wanted to do this within 2-3 years. I thought it couldn't work, but by now I think it can.
And do you see the progress spread evenly across the country?
Yes, I think the way they are handling it, it's across oblasts, and it goes from Lviv to the frontier before Donetsk and Lugansk. Can
you comment on what the conflict in the East, what kind of impact that is having on attempts at decentralization?
Well, not in a very particular way, only in a general political way, maybe in the sense that if we have this problem in the East, we should organize our country properly. And that, of course, pushes, and the advantage is that the Verkhovna Rada passes legislation rather fast, and that had not happened when I was working on the same subject 10 years ago.
And the speed now, things are moving, the conflict in the East is influencing that, it's pushing things more quickly.
Well, only the general process, not in particular the steps. They are one after the other, and there has been enough legislation passed, regulations issued, and so on. No, I don't think in a particular way, only the general political feeling, keep your house in order.
Why particularly do you think is the financial side of decentralization so important for Ukraine?
Only if you have finances in your hands, you can do something for the citizens and for your election people. There's a German saying I heard some time ago, the most sensitive organ of the body of a person, is his portemonnaie, where he carries the money. And that's true.
Some say that with decentralization, then, there's a risk that giving control of finances to a more local level is going to multiply the problem of corruption.
In a mathematical sense, of course, this is convincing, because down there are more hands than at the upper level. And very often international companies in other countries, they were happy to deal with the upper government, paying corruption there once, and they care for the right regulations down there. It's true in principle, but it's true in every country. So even also in Germany, of course, we have corruption. If you have a decent accounting system, and I think Ukraine is working on that, you can reduce it. You will always have corruption in any country, but reduce it.
So you think, but Ukraine at the moment doesn't necessarily have the personnel or the institutional structures to deal with that problem, but it will?
Well, I think the accounting system, that's what I'm referring to, is in a kind of a basic way there, but of course you can improve on that. I think they are at the moment, the basis is there, but you can still improve it. They know the problem, and that's half of the problem solved.
Finally then, how long does Ukraine need to wait before these reforms are realized?
We are talking about big administration spread over all of the country, and it's important to give the right incentives so they don't think of looking only at Kiev, but looking at their own region or Romada or whatever. And I think there have been decisive steps taken over the last 2 or 3 years, and they are implemented now. If this goes on like this, and I hope it does, and I'm kind of positive about it, then you might see changes faster than I would expect it in a country with a centralized past. So, of course, with some things you must not think in terms of 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 or 10, but the important thing is whether you are on the right track. And the track I observed over the my last 2 trips are the right ones.
Mr. Zimmermann, thank you very much for a fascinating discussion on the fiscal aspects of decentralization here in Ukraine. You're watching Ukraine Today. Now let's go back to the news.